today. How so-called free trade agreements threaten the beauty of the internet and cloud the civil liberties of the digital generation. Your host is Rick Falkvinger, and this is Liberties Report.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Good evening and welcome to Liberties Report Week 16, 2015. This has been a week that has been heavily characterized by the TTIP and the TPP, so-called free trade agreements that are actually about anything but free trade. They are essentially about corporate corruption legislated across borders. And the internet is taking quite a heavy hit along with civil liberties in these so-called free trade agreements that are the exact opposite under false flag. In asking why so many policymakers seem hell-bent on destroying the internet and everything that it brings, it's time to remember the important concept of analog equivalent rights. Analog equivalent rights. Civil liberties, hard-won, centuries-old civil liberties, are currently being lost. Not just a little, but wholesale. The current generation is failing utterly at carrying over the civil liberties of our parents onto our children. And I cannot stress enough what a monumental failure of the current generation that really is. Policy is still being constructed like the internet was some kind of toy you can take away from kids when they haven't been behaving, rather than being the single most important infrastructure of society. Yes, the internet is more important than anything else. It's more important than road networks. It's more important than the power grid. Even when the power grid is down today, you can still use the net to work, to pay your bills, and to order out for pizza using an ordinary laptop and an ordinary cell phone. It is the single most important infrastructure. And yet, we are letting the single most important infrastructure get regulated by the cartoon industry. The cartoon industry. Seriously. Now, we would never let Disney regulate the road network or the power grid. No, that's not for Disney Corporation. Policymakers are not satisfied until they have a cartoon industry in the driver's seat for the most important infrastructure. Nothing less will do. You will note that the difference between a cartoon industry and the cartoon industry here is mostly semantic. Here's a non-exhaustive list of civil liberties that existed in the analog world for our parents and that have been lost for our children. The ability to hold a private conversation that was not recorded by authority for use against them, either immediately or at an indeterminate point somewhere in the future, near or distant. The ability to drive about or walk about in town without your moves being watched and recorded for future use against you. The messenger immunity, the ability for a messenger to not be liable for a message carried, which dates back to the Roman Empire, but which the copyright industry, the cartoon industry, is trying to end under the guise of ISPs must take responsibility for copyright monopoly violations. That's the messenger immunity right there. The ability to read a newspaper anonymously and unwatched. In fact, the ability to seek and share any information anonymously and unwatched. The list goes on. This is not rocket science. It's a matter of disregarding the technology used and making sure that our children's generation has at least the same minimum set of civil liberties as that of our parents' generation. And right now our children don't. And that's because obsolete industries are writing policy for our children's generation in order to prevent their own obsolescence, instead of safeguarding the civil liberties of our parents. And that is shameful. And yes, I am saying that the copyright monopoly is fundamentally incompatible with the internet, just as it is fundamentally incompatible with the concept of public libraries. That debate, in mid-1850s, ended in public libraries taking clear precedence before the copyright monopoly. The same thing needs to happen again on several fronts. And this is what we call analog equivalent rights. The civil liberties that existed in the analog world must carry over into the digital world. The alternative is horrifying. I'm Rick Falkvinge and this is Liberties Report. Visit our sponsor, Private Internet Access. Good night.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Liberties Report is produced using exclusively free software.